Welcome back, guys, and welcome to another comparison video. Today we'll be comparing two cars from the 2006 model year. We're currently sitting in a 2006 BMW Z4 M Roadster, and we'll be comparing this against my co-owned Porsche Cayman S of the 987.1 generation. Both of these cars were touted in their time almost 2 decades ago as being really focused and fun to drive little German sports cars. I'm actually going to drive the Z4 M first, and then hop into my Cayman S and see if that car still should be considered the benchmark in the sub $30,000 sports car market. So on paper, these cars are fairly similar. Both have 6-cylinder engines, over 3 liters in displacement, more or less 300 horsepower. They're relatively lightweight with a 6-speed manual, and both can be purchased nowadays for under 30 grand. Some more details about the Z4M. Well, the owner Philip has done a few choice mods to this to just enhance the overall driving dynamics. He has the Bilstein B12 Pro Kit, which is essentially a Bilstein B8 shock with an Eibach lowering spring. We also have SPL rear camber arms and Rogue Engineering rear shock mounts. And we're on a Continental ExtremeContact sport tire. In terms of specs, this is powered by the S54 engine. It's the same motor from the E46 M3, but it's been tuned slightly differently. So it's a 3.2 liter inline 6-cylinder with Vanos, making 330 horsepower in this application and a little over 260 pound-feet of torque. All the power is sent, of course, to the rear axle, 6-speed manual transmission, your only choice of transmission for the Z4M. Of course, you could also get this car in a coupe body style, which is a little bit less common, but if you really want to enjoy the sound of that engine, top down is the way to go, although I do prefer the exterior design of the coupe. This car should weigh just over 3,200 pounds, so relatively lightweight, but still a couple hundred pounds heavier than the Cayman S. Even though the standard Z4 at the time came with electric power steering, BMW opted to give this a good old-fashioned hydraulic rack. It's quicker than the rack in the E46 M3. This also has the same brakes carried over from the E46 M3 CSL. In terms of the interior, very bare bones for modern standards, but still overall pretty good quality. I do think this piece of brushed metal here along the dash does date the interior quite a bit. Just the overall look and feel is a little bit old, and don't get me started on this infotainment display, if you can even call it that. It's really just an ultra low resolution trip meter and GPS navigation unit. But physical controls for everything, gotta love that. So in terms of driving modes, there's really just one thing, the sport button, which makes the throttle way too sensitive, so we're not going to use that. Because we are driving with the top up to preserve that audio quality, there are quite a bit of squeaks, creaks, and rattles from this car, as you'd expect for a 20-year-old Roadster. Second gear. Oh yes, the metallic howl of an S54 engine that revs to 8,000 RPM. There's nothing quite like it. It is one of my favorite M-car engines. Second, maybe only to the S65. Actually, also the V10 and that E60 M5 is pretty amazing too. Third favorite M-car engine. And you know what? 330 horsepower in a 3,200 pound car still feels adequate by modern standards. This engine isn't a torque monster. I just hopped out of a G82 M4 competition, and it's not even close in terms of the low RPM response and torque. But when we're talking about top-end power, this engine still delivers. You rev this thing out to 8,000, and you still get plenty of straight-line performance. And you don't get any fake piped-in engine sound or a loud blaring exhaust. You just get good old-fashioned induction noise. The 6-speed manual, nice and notchy. I mean, it's typical BMW, but you know what? The engagement is very positive. There's no way you're missing a shift with this gearbox. I just love the way this engine builds to its red line. Very linear power delivery. And the pedals, perfectly spaced for heel toe. It's just a driver's car through and through. Even though we have McPherson strut front suspension, it has a very pointy front end, and it's just a joy to drive through the corners. Really good steering feel. Basically feels like an E46 at the front end, but with a slightly quicker steering ratio. Brakes feel good, a little bit better than a stock E46. That must be the CSL brake treatment that the Z4M got. Now you do need to keep this engine on boil by keeping it in the right gear. Third gear, oftentimes I'm finding on this road, keeps the RPMs below 4,000, which is not where you want to be. Oh wow, what a driving experience. It's simple, it's back to basics, and it's just good old-fashioned BMW M car goodness. Everything you want, nothing that you don't. If you want the chassis rigidity as well, go for the coupe, but this Roadster is still super enjoyable to drive. There is a little bit of flex when you're pushing the car really hard, especially in the left to right transitions, and even just driving over these reflectors on the road. I mean, you hear the squeaks and the rattles for sure. But let's be real, if you buy a Roadster, you're gonna drive it with the top down most of the time. I suspect if you were to swap the steering wheel out, and I know you're gonna lose the airbag and it's not ideal for a street car, but if you were to swap this extra thick rim steering wheel out for a much thinner unit, much lighter steering wheel, you would get even more steering feel. This already has really good steering feel, but I bet when I hop back into the Cayman S, that's gonna have better feel, and a big part of that is the steering wheel itself. A little bit of wind or air leakage here at the window. This Bilstein aftermarket suspension, the B12 Pro Kit, feels pretty good. It feels like it could be an OEM sport suspension option, honestly. Unsettled over those bumps. It's not the most rigid chassis in the world in convertible form, but that doesn't really matter. The Z4M, especially in Roadster form, is not a car that you're gonna see a whole lot of out at track days. You'll see plenty of E46s, but the Z4M is more of a street car in my opinion, or at least that's how most owners treat them nowadays. It's kind of a more special driving experience on the road compared to an E46 M3. You sit lower, it has a longer hood, it's more aesthetically special, and if you crack the window just a little bit, glorious induction note. This really would benefit from an aftermarket intake though, like the Carbonious carbon intake of the E46 that I recently reviewed. The Z4M really is a timeless BMW. This is what M cars used to be all about, and I hate to say it, but modern M cars just don't capture the same level of pure driving engagement. There's so much number nowadays. This car has real steering feel. It has a manual transmission. It's relatively lightweight. There's so much to love here and so little to hate. All right, there's the owner, Philip. Now it's time to hop into my 06 Cayman S and see if it can even hold a candle to this amazing BMW M car. All right, back in my co-owned 2006 Porsche 987.1 Cayman S. I'll put the mod list in the description, but my buddy James and I have done quite a few mods to this car just to enhance the overall enjoyability of the car purely on the street. Again, it's not a track car. We'll probably never see a racetrack. So in terms of interior mods, we have the Momo Monte Carlo 350mm steering wheel with a Works Bell hub, function first shift knob with a Numeric shift kit, Öhlins road and track suspension, Apex SM10 wheels wrapped in Falken RT660 tires. And last but not least, a Top Gear valved exhaust. So this car has more mods than Philips Z4M, but I would still describe these mods as OEM plus. They just enhance the overall character of the car without going too far. So this car is powered by the M97 engine. It's a 3.4 liter naturally aspirated flat six. Makes 295 horsepower, 251 pound-feet of torque. So it's down about 35 horsepower from the Z4M and down about 10 or 15 pound-feet of torque. But the car crucially weighs around 200 pounds less, maybe a little bit more. Sub 3,000 pounds should be possible for a base spec 987.1S. Open differential on the rear axle, mid-engine, of course, 6-speed manual. Let's see how this car compares to the Z4M. I mean, just the fact that it's mid-engine and lighter than the Z4M means that this technically should have superior driving dynamics, right? Is that actually the case? Let's find out. Well, I will tell you one thing that is immediately apparent. This has better steering feel. And the Z4M is no slouch in the steering feel department. But this one is just even more precise. And the front end responds even more immediately to my inputs. Nothing beats a mid-engined front end response and the steering feel of this 987 generation with this smaller Momo wheel is glorious. But I will say, this engine, although just as effective as that S54 inline 6, doesn't feel as special. It doesn't rev nearly as high. Redline's around 7,200 RPM versus almost 8,000 for that BMW. Also, I will say the stock shifter of the 987, far inferior to the stock shifter of the Z4M, but with a numeric upgrade and this function first knob, it's even better than the Z4M's. Very similar in a straight line, but there's more low-end and mid-range torque with this 3.4 liter compared to that 3.2. Wow. The brakes in the Z4M feel better than this. These are just stock brakes. Just so much information about the front end coming through the wheel. It's a glorious thing. Oh, I just love driving this car in the canyons. It's just so perfect with these mods. But back to the comparison. This is the more precise car, even in stock form. But doesn't mean it's the more enjoyable car. I really think if we were comparing coupe versus coupe, the Z4M might be more exciting in some ways because it is front engine rear wheel drive, because it's more willing to step out that rear end around every corner, and because it has the more intoxicating higher revving engine. The Cayman S is much more of a precision instrument, and it's all relative. That Z4M is a very precise handling car, but when you compare it against a lighter weight mid-engine machine like this, it does feel a little bit blunt. This just has that natural inclination to pivot around its center point. And these mods not only address the weak points like the stock shifter feel, but also they enhance some of the already very strong points of the car, like the steering. I feel like a broken record now, but getting a thinner, lighter steering wheel, smaller diameter, really does enhance the steering feel of most cars, especially cars with hydraulic steering racks. Yes, we are losing the airbag, so if safety is your priority, as it should be, not the way to go. But thankfully this car barely gets driven, just the occasional canyon drive. But which car do I prefer more? Did I make the right choice? Should I have gotten a Z4M? I'll put it this way, and this is a very, very personal opinion here. If I could get a Z4M coupe for the same price as this Cayman S, sub $30,000, that's probably the route I would go. But because the coupes are even rarer than the Roadster, they command a dramatically higher asking price. And at that point, I'm not quite sure if it's worth it. At $35,000, $40,000+, I mean, you can get a 987.2 Cayman S, and that's a car you can throw the same mods on and actually enjoy at the racetrack relatively worry-free. That's a very enticing proposition. And also just knowing that the E46 M3 Coupe exists, and you can get that at $30,000 or $35,000 at most. Does the Z4M Coupe really deserve its premium? Unless you're going for the rarity factor, I would argue it probably doesn't. But the Roadster for me is just a little bit too compromised. You get the squeaks and rattles when you're driving with the top up, which is how I would be driving it most of the time. So that being said, guys, let me know which car you would rather have for your $30,000 or so. The Cayman S 987.1 or the Z4M Roadster. Both such excellent analog driver's cars. If you want one, now's the time to pick them up. They've both hit, I would say, close to the bottom of their respective depreciation curves at, I mean, $25,000. That's a very, very enticing proposition for both cars. But for me, I'm more than happy with the Cayman S as it sits right now. It's such a great canyon carving machine. But absolutely, I wouldn't be even the least bit upset if I had a Z4M instead. So shout out to Philip, the owner of that Z4M. Let me know how you think these cars compare, and I'll see you in the next one.